Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We made it through the week, and this is 1 week closer to Adobe Max, which I'm super excited about. I'll talk more about that in just a moment, but a big hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone joining me here on Behance. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any other platform, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so you can watch along and chat with us. We've got Laura and One Sock Wonder and Anna Heat, Philip from Germany, and if you are tuning in live, let me know in the chat where you're tuning in from as well. Mike from Nashville, Cody, and Andrew, who just wrapped up his fantastic Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge, and he's going to be back, I believe, right after this, possibly. I don't know the schedule. Who knows? No, today's Kyle's going to be back after this. He'll be back at some point, I think later today, with Office Hours with Nick, which is going to be great as well. Wade and Jack, and we've got Mohammed for first live masterclass. Welcome, Mohammed. Thank you for joining live. Umacorn and Andreas from Germany, Megan and Francisco, and Ahit from Boston. Great to see everyone from all over the world, which is fantastic. All right, so what do we have planned for today? But before we get into the actual designing part of this, I mentioned Adobe Max not too long ago. I've been mentioning this a lot because I'm really excited for this year's Adobe Max. With everything going on, we unfortunately couldn't meet in person this year like we have done many years in the past. However, this year we're pivoting a little bit, and it's going to be all online. It's going to be completely free. We have over 350 sessions. I'm going to be hosting a few of those. We're going to have a fantastic keynote. We're going to have a lot of cool stuff at Adobe Max this year. So go to max.adobe.com. Make sure to register, sign up for your sessions. And I think my Adobe Max sessions, there's like over 10,000 people already registered, which is fantastic. My Adobe XD sessions, sorry, not a Max. Max, I don't know how many people are registered for those, but probably a lot. But mine, at least, I know it is about 10,000, which is amazing. I can't wait to show all of you some of the cool new features we've been working on. I've been working on some videos, and it's going to be a good time. We've got Chris from Colorado. Great to see. We got someone from India and Egypt. Wow, great to see everyone. Vipin saying I missed due to change in times. Yeah, the last 2 weeks we had to switch times around. All of us are going through a lot of different meetings for Adobe Max that's coming up at October 20th. And so Paul had to switch his masterclass spots with me. But I think we should be back to normal. Hopefully. We'll see. All right, so as for today, last week, we started off building out this coffee application. Very delicious looking coffee application. And actually, there's Laura down there in the replies. She's tuning in live. So we're building out this, we built out basically this screen over here. And I posted this shot to Dribbble and Twitter. If you're not following me on those platforms, definitely follow me. As we get closer to Adobe Max, we're going to have a lot of information. And of course, when new videos are posted, new features, I'm going to be covering those on all the platforms. So go follow me. And some of you wanted to know how to design this specific screen and maybe how to do some micro interactions around this specific design. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And we're going to just dive into things. So let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD. Boop. There we go. And here's the design that we left off with last week. Now we did create a little bit of a micro interaction last week at the very end. It was very quick. I kind of rushed through it because we're running out of time. So let's revisit some of those micro interactions before we get to the other screens of this design. So let's begin. We're going to start with a simple component state. So maybe down here, right? We've got these different sizes that a user might want to tap on. Small, medium, large. I definitely go for the large coffee when I can. But we want to wire this up so that users who are testing this or interacting with it in some capacity, they're able to just dive in here and click on one of them or tap on one of them, right? Instead of using multiple artboards to make this happen, which is going to take up a lot of space, we can use component states. And if you're new to XD, you may not be familiar with this yet. Hopefully this will introduce you to the wonderful world of component states. And as the name kind of mentions, requires a component. So there's many ways you can create a component inside of Adobe XD. I have a group selected. And by the way, I should probably mention that we also have stacks enabled. It's a fairly new feature. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that inside of this particular group, things are organized, not only for my sanity, but also so that Stacks knows what the heck is happening, right? If I were to enable Stack right now, XD is going to do its best to actually, wow, okay. Well, that just completely, I didn't expect that. I knew that XD was smart. I didn't know how smart. So if you take, let me undo this. If you take a look at this, there are a lot of layers inside of this larger group, this sizes group, as you can see here, right? There's a lot of layers and none of it is organized. They're all just spread out in this group. And what I was going to do is I was going to grab all these layers, like let's say this coffee, this background, and this text layer. I'm just holding down my shift key and clicking them on all of them. And you can even see, you can even see in the layers panel that they're not even beside each other. There's other layers in between them, right? So what I was going to do is I was going to manually group this one, Command and Control G, and then go here, group that one, Command and Control G. But what I did, because sometimes, when you turn a stack on, XD does its best to figure out what should actually be grouped. So what I did was I selected the sizes group and I turned on a stack within the properties inspector right here. And look at that. XD actually grouped everything as it should be grouped. That's I'm impressed. Good job, team. Let me just go ahead and name these. Now that would be cool if XD was also able to name these groups based on the content. That'd be cool, but not just yet. Small, medium, and large, right? Now, the benefit of stacks, if you haven't explored them yet, is I can just grab any of these layers or groups and just move them, right? And everything else moves out of the way as you would expect, which is wonderful. So if you wanted the large at the beginning, medium in the middle, right? Right, Megan's saying, what? I know. Isn't that crazy? Again, I did not expect that. I've done it in some situations where XD has done a pretty good job at grouping some of these things, but that worked out well. That was cool. Anyways, so now that we have our group created and we have everything organized, we're going to want to turn this into a component. So lots of different ways to do it. You can right click, make component. You can right click on your canvas on the object over here, make component. You can hop into your assets panel down here at the bottom. You can make component there. You can press the plus button in the properties inspector. You can make component there. There's under the object menu, you can make, there's just so many different ways you can make components in Adobe XD. I don't know which one to pick. I'm just gonna press this one here. Boop. So now that we have a component, right? And you're gonna notice that the solid diamond icon at the top left indicates that this is our main component for this particular group of elements, right? So if you want to make changes across all of your instances of this component, you would just make changes to the main component and it would push them around, right? Which is great. But another benefit of using components is that you're able to create states. And this will allow you to create different versions of this component essentially. So back within the properties inspector, this one doesn't have as many options to create states. You can't do it all over the place. Back in the properties inspector, you've got a plus button beside your default state, and you can create a hover state if you wanted to. Now this is a mobile design, so hover states don't really apply, so we're not going to talk about that today. You can create a new state, and this can be basically anything. So let's go ahead and name this small. Now what I should have done, let me actually go back. No, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, right? What I was going to say is what I should have done is had the small as the default state, but as long as I name everything, everything's fine. Philip is asking, is there a rule that you have to use another option every time? There really isn't. I like to kind of mix it up a little bit so people know where the different places are to create a component. Most of the time when I'm not streaming, it's just a very quick Command and Control K. Half the time I don't even bother naming the component. I should probably do that, but it just makes my process a little bit easier. Just to Command and Control K, bam, and then there you go. There are 4 ways to convert components. Yes, there might be more. 1, 2, you can right click here, that'd be 3. You can right click in your layers panel, that'd be 4. Under the object menu, and then the shortcut. So 6 maybe? It's a little bit crazy, but hey, there you go. All right, so I have the new state created. default state and new state, which I called small. And with that state active, all I'm going to do is just dive into this component and make my changes. So I'm going to actually start by grabbing the style of this object here. So I'm just going to simply copy Command and Control C. And on this object, I can right click and then paste the appearance, or there's a shortcut Command Option V. There we go. And then for this one, I can just grab that style, pop it there. And I want to make some changes to the text as well. This one is going to go back to 100% and this one down to 50. Whoops. And I can use the number keys on my keyboard to very quickly change the opacity. So now I have my default state, which is the small or the medium, and then my second state, which is small. Yeah, Umacorn says, no more excuses that you can't find it. Indeed. And I'm going to make one more state, and this is going to be for our large, right? And I'll just very quickly do the exact same process that we did a moment ago. And, oops, I missed it. Bam, there we go. So now we have our three states. We have our default state, we have our small state, and we have our large state. Is there a way to get any portfolios reviewed? So these masterclasses, we don't typically do portfolio reviews, but the streams during the week, we definitely do. So keep an eye on those streams, especially if you're a UI and UX designer, the XD related streams. Also, closer to Adobe Max, we're going to be doing portfolio reviews as well. So hop into Discord. There's a channel in there that Gus is going to be posting more information as we get closer. Philip is saying, waiting for an option to rename the default state. Yeah, I would like that as well, Philip. I know that I believe it's on the team's radar to get around to. They just haven't been able to prioritize that just yet. So, default state, small, large, right? Oops, I noticed an issue. This, I need to drop that down. That looks good. That looks good, and that looks good. Perfect. All right, so now that we have all these various states created, we need to be able to wire them up so that a user can dive in here and tap. Vipin's saying, which font are you using? Is it Adobe font? So this one is Mastra, I believe. Yep, Mastra, which I did grab from Adobe stock, Adobe fonts. Most of the fonts and typefaces that I use in these streams will have come from Adobe fonts. I believe this one here is Josephine Sans. And somewhere up here, possibly here, nope, I changed it. I was using Poppins, but I didn't like the fact that I was using 3 different typefaces, so I just streamlined it to 2 of them. All right, so back to this. We want to be able to wire this up for prototyping. So I'm going to go to prototyping. Laura's saying the state of the large coffee needs to lower the opacity. Yes, I did get around to that. There's like a 15-second delay on these streams, so you should be seeing that shortly, if you haven't already. All right, so into prototype mode, what I'm going to do is I have my default state active, which is medium. Again, it's a little bit backwards, that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and select any of the objects within the small, or I can just select the entire group. And instead of dragging this wire to another artboard, we don't have another artboard, I'm simply going to click on it. Click. And this will allow me to choose right in here under destination the different states that I want to navigate between. So this one is going to be the small state. It's going to automatically default to Auto-Animate. Now, in this case, there really isn't anything that's going to be moving across these different groups and states. So transition should work with a simple none for animation. I can also do the same for large. And I'm going to choose the large state. That looks good. Now I'm going to go back and pressing the escape key to go back up 1 level to the parent component. Let's go into the small state. And I'm going to go to the default state. And all the other properties for this transition are maintained, so I don't have to do anything else. And then do the exact same thing for the large state. There we go. So we've essentially wired up the entire state, right? We've got our default state, small and large. And now that it's been wired up, all I have to do is press the play button at the top right, and I can very easily just click between any of these different states to select the size of coffee that I'm desiring, which is great. And many of you who have been using XD for a while probably remember the good old days where you did not need to you needed to have separate artboards for every single one of these interactions, and no longer need that, which is great. Philip saying, is if there is nothing to animate, is the auto-animate option the same as transition? Essentially, yes. It will default to, it's more of like a dissolve. So if I were to go back just to show you what would happen. So if I'm in the default state and let's say, let me change this one where I click on small, let me go ahead and change that to auto-animate. And you're gonna notice, if you look closely, it's more of like a, it's kind of a cool effect, honestly, but it's more of a dissolve, right? Kind of cool. But let me change that to transition. But if we do want to explore a little bit about what Auto-Animate can do within states, we can explore this one right over here, this toggle switch. And this is the one I kind of skimmed through at the end of last week's stream. Actually, you know what? I'm going to skip that one. Go to last week's stream, you can take a look, but let's do something a little bit more exciting. You may have seen me do this a while back, and we may want to get a little bit fancy, because it's Fancy Friday, with this number counter, and create some sort of animation, right? Joshua was saying it was horrible to use multiple artboards. I agree. It was. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna set up a number counter for this. So when a user presses on the plus button, the number 2 kind of comes into play, and you can go to 3 and 4 and so on and so forth, right? Vipin says, I didn't know we can go into a component and add animation to elements inside of a component. Indeed. So here's what we're going to do. Inside of this group, we want to start by altering this text layer a little bit. So I'm going to dive in here. Instead of just having the number 1, we're going to press return 2, 3, and 4. We'll do 4. We don't want to go too crazy. And I can go ahead and also space this out a little bit. Just a touch. There we go. And of course, we don't want to be able to see every single number on this, right? Because if we press play, we've got these weird numbers kind of floating in the middle of nowhere. So we want to mask those numbers. Hey, Tia, welcome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the rectangle tool from the tools bar and simply just drag out a rectangle across this area. I'm going to make sure it's lined up really nicely. And this will allow me to use this rectangle as a mask. Pop in there. Yeah, it's a good point, Philip. I am using pop-ins here. Maybe I want to, let's see, Josephine. That one's not bad. I think that could work. I'm going to bump this size up just a touch. There we go. That's better. All right. So back here, we've got our rectangle looking pretty good, right? Perfect. I'm not too worried about the styling of this rectangle. Doesn't really matter at this point, but what I want to do is have the rectangle selected and also the text layer. So I'm going to hold down my Command or Control key and click on the text layer. So now I have the rectangle and the text layer selected. Under the object menu, mask with shape. You can also use the Command or Control and Shift M shortcut to do that as well. If you're on Windows and you don't have the object menu at the top, you would right click and you can mask with shape right from there. So now what it's done, it's essentially taken that text layer, which is underneath that rectangle, and use that as a mask, right? So all those numbers that were down below are now hidden, which is exactly what we want. I'm going to name this numbers. Perfect. So now that that is set up, we will be able to very easily create this animated number counter. And just like with the coffee selector, the size selector down to the bottom, we want to make sure to turn this into a component. So Command or Control K, you can do it in your assets panel, a lot of different ways again. Boop, there we go. And now we have our main component active. And just like we did with the size selector, we're going to go ahead and create a new state. I'm going to name this one 2. And now that that's been created, I'm going to just dive in here to find the number text layer and just move this on up. So now I have 2 in the center. Now, of course, I may want to alter this over here because this is currently white, which tells you, hopefully tells the user that you cannot go down. But in this case, you can go down, right? So I'm going to just simply sample a color, right? So there's number 2. I'm going to create a new state, which is going to be number 3. Whoop. Move this on up. That looks good. And then we're going to do one more state, which is number 4. And maybe for whatever reason, you can only order 4 coffees max, right? So in this case, we're going to grab the plus button and change this one to white. You can probably even decrease the opacity a little bit, but I'm going to leave it at white, just like that. Hey, Sarah, welcome. All right. So we've got our states. We've got default, 2, 3, and 4. Everything looks pretty good, right? Do want to make sure this is centered. It is. That looks good. All right. So now we can go back into prototype mode like we did before. And I'm going to select the individual layer. In this case, it's the plus button. And we're going to choose our second state to transition to. But instead of a simple transition this time, because if I were to play this and press on number 1, it would simply cut to number 2, which you can probably do, right? However, I want to get a little bit fancy with this. We're going to choose Auto-Animate in this case. So we're going to animate to number 2, and maybe we'll do a little bit of a snap. And you don't want users waiting around too long, so maybe 0.2 seconds will make a nice quick transition. If we press play, let me zoom in here. And I'm going to press on the plus button. Fancy. So now we're going to just do the same thing very quickly for all the other states. We'll go here. Go to the state number 3. We also want to make sure to wire up the minus button to go to the other states, the one previous, right? So number 3, we're going to go to number 4. And here we're going to go to number 2. And then finally from number 4, we can go backwards to number 3. Hey Rita, welcome. All right. So now if we press play, let me zoom in one more time. We can just click on the different icons to go up and down. There we go. So now we have a little bit of a, as Vipin says, fancy number counter. And all of a sudden, we can start interacting with various elements on this artboard. So we can choose a large drink, we can choose 4 or 3 or 2 or whatever it might be. And there we go. Looking pretty good. All right. Hey Sam, welcome. I did get your email, Sam. Maybe that's why you're in here, just to make sure I'm remembering you. I did get your email. It's been busy. I will reply to it at some point. Sorry about that. So we've gone and set up a few micro interactions. Mohammed's asking, how do I register for Adobe Max session for XD? So if you register for Adobe Max, let me go ahead and hop over here. Make sure to press on the register/sign-in button at the top. Once you're in and registered, you'll be able to search for Adobe XD or my name if you want to see my sessions as well, and you'll be able to register right there and then for all the different sessions. All right, back to XD. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we do want to tackle this screen over here now that we've kind of explored some of those micro interactions using component state. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to go ahead and select this artboard and duplicate it over to the right. Now, in some cases, that it's probably a good idea. In some cases, it may not be. Sometimes it comes down to what your workflow is, but this screen is going to be completely different than this screen over here. So in this case, I'm probably going to end up just deleting everything and then just starting from scratch. Or what you can also do is grab the artboard tool from the tools bar on the left and just choose, in this case, I think it was the 11 Max. Yeah, it was just that one. So you just click on that and you have a new artboard. Hey Boss Jen, welcome. And we've got Riza is asking, is the Flutter plugin for Adobe XD useful? I haven't personally used it myself since I'm not a developer, but I have spoken to many developers who have said it's very useful. It was developed by Google, so they kind of know what they're doing, I hope. And just got to use it. I don't know anything about development or Flutter or anything like that, so I can't testify to that, but I have heard that's pretty good. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start creating this screen. And again, this screen is more of like a home screen where you can see your featured drinks, maybe you can search. There's a few icons at the bottom. So we're going to start blocking some of that information out. There might also be an icon at the top. But let's go ahead and let's name this to home. And do we have guides? We do have guides. On the previous artboard, I did have guides, and those carry over beautifully from there. If you did not duplicate this artboard, what you could do is select the artboard that does have the guides enabled, go up to the view menu, down to guides, copy the guides, and then you'll be able to paste it on the next artboard, which is great. All right, so starting off pretty simple, we are going to grab the rectangle, and I'm just going to draw out a rectangle across this artboard, and this is going to be for our search experience. I'm going to round out the corners just like that. Now, because we're going with more of a darker theme to this vibe, right? We've got this very minimalistic search bar at the top. We're going to kind of pull some of that in. Now, of course, we do have a style that we've been kind of going with up here. Now, my concern with this, right, if I copy this, hop over here, paste the appearance, is that this will probably stand out way too much. And that may not necessarily be the goal of this homepage, right? If this is looking like that, your users will kind of drive their attention to this search bar. And in some applications, that may be what you want. But in this case, we kind of want the search bar to be there when it's needed and also not be there when it's not needed, right? So in that case, what we're going to do, I kind of like the idea of this gold border, but I may want to just make some changes, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample the background and maybe just drop the color a little bit. And then for the border, let's try just dropping the opacity. Something like that, right? Very simple, very minimal. Now, we've spoken a lot about accessibility in the past. This is likely not going to pass accessibility, right? If I were to go into my plugins panel, and let's go ahead and find the Stark plugin. I can install that. I can select this, Stark, check contrast. Nothing passes, right? So you'll need probably a stronger border, a stronger color. So just keep that in mind, right? Philip saying, agree, the search bar is not the entry point for everything. Yeah, exactly. And what, one thing a lot of applications do is they just have a search icon like on the right or the left-hand side, so that if someone does want to search, they can just press on that. It might expand possibly or go to another screen. But yeah, so keep some of that in mind. I am going to bump up the shadow a little bit just to separate it from the background a touch. It's hard to see because it's a fairly dark shadow, right, on a dark background. Let me just experiment with this color a little bit. That could work. Let's see. It's okay. It's not bad, but it could work. I'm not loving it, honestly, but you know what? We're going to run with it for now. And then inside of this search experience, we want a few things. One, we want obviously a search icon. So another plugin we're going to dive back into is, it's usually featured somewhere. No, I don't see it. Maybe it's here. Icons for design. Install. There we go. And it's installing. There we go. And I can just dive in here, type in search, and let's go for the feather search icon. It's a pretty nice, simple search icon. I'm going to change the color to white and just drop the size a touch. And it is a border-based icon, so I could change the size to 2 if I don't want it that thick. And I can also sample, let's say this goldish color right here, just again so everything blends in really nicely. It's there when you need it, it's not there when you don't need it. And then finally, we might want some text. That's a really hard shadow for Howard. Yeah, it probably is, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, realistically, I probably wouldn't use a shadow. I would go for more of a stronger border, for example. Just so there's a little, passes accessibility a little bit more. But again, I don't want the search bar to be too strong at the top. All right, so now we want some text. Just asking the users a simple question, what will energize you today? And this is going to be where they can type in what coffee they want. And I'm going to just sample the exact same color. It's a little bit too small, so I'm going to bump it up. Let's try 16. And let's see what that looks like. It's all right. Again, I'm not loving it, but I think we're going to run with it. Because the search bar, like Philip was mentioning, definitely not the entry point. So I may explore something a little bit different at some point. But what I do want to do is underneath this search experience is have some sort of categories, featured, drinks, bakery, favorites, and that sort of thing. So this one's going to be pretty simple. With the text tool, I'm going to type out featured. Now these ones, since this is probably something users are going to be interacting with quite often, I do want to make sure that these are a little bit larger and also a little bit bolder, right? That's probably a little bit too big. Let's drop it to 18, see what that looks like. That could work. And I'm going to put featured right here. And over here, let's go for drinks. And this one, we might want to just drop the opacity a little bit. Let's go for bakery. And then finally, we might have some favorites. And this, I think, is another opportunity to start using stacks again. And Megan's saying contrast is pretty low. Yeah, it is still pretty low. I'm going to definitely revisit this search bar at some point, but a little bit low. So I'm going to grab all these links right here and make sure to put them into a group. Command and Control G. Whoops. Whoop, there we go. And this will just be links. And what I can do now is I can turn on stack within the properties inspector. Now, immediately it's not going to automatically space everything out, but what we can do is just hop in here, dive into one of these, hold down Shift, and now we have everything spaced out exactly as you would expect, which is great. So we've got our featured, we've got drinks, bakery, and favorites. Now, to really emphasize that we are on the featured screen right now, we may want an additional element. And to do that, very simply, I'm going to grab a line, draw one out, and I might want to just grab this gold color from my assets panel, make it a bit thicker, and whoops, and just pop this right about here. There we go. All right. You know what, for now, because the search bar is bothering me, I'm going to hide it. It never happened, right? All right, that looks pretty good. So we are on the featured page, and now what we want to do, maybe we want to create one of the featured drinks. We're probably not going to have time to create all of them, because I do want to get to some other elements of this application. So what I'm going to do with my good old rectangle, I'm just going to draw one out across this artboard. I do want to leave some room at the bottom for icons and things like that, but I'm going to make this nice and long, just like that. And this is where the first featured drink is going to be displayed. And this specific area is going to have basically two sections. It's going to have one section right about here, which is going to be for all the information about this drink. And then there's going to be an image at the top. So I'm going to duplicate this. And now we have these two elements, right? Just hide it, indeed. Any sneaks for Adobe Max? I wish I could. I really wish I could, but I cannot give any sneaks at the moment. Our marketing team would not be happy with me. They might be watching right now. Hopefully they're giggling a little bit. But yeah, not yet. Hopefully soon though. But we do have some pretty cool stuff coming up. I'm going to make sure to round out the corners. 24 looks a bit too harsh. Let's try 16. That looks a bit better. There we go. So this area here is where our information about drinks is going to be displayed. And then we'll want our image right up here. Now, if we're bouncing off this pumpkin spice latte thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to Finder, where I have these amazing looking images of these drinks. I've got, cappuccinos and lattes, and I don't know what half of these things, I don't know what this thing's called. But I grabbed them from Adobe stock. They're great looking images. But I'm going to grab this one right over here, this lovely pumpkin spice latte, drag it directly into Adobe XD. Bam. That looks so delicious. I'm just ready for a pumpkin spice latte, honestly. All right. And now this guy over here, what we might want to do, again, to get a little bit fancy, is add a bit of a background blur. So I'm going to turn background blur on. I'm going to blur it quite a bit and then play around with the... There we go. Play around with that a little bit. Move this down a touch so we have a little bit more of that blur down here at the bottom. All right. So now that we have this kind of set up, this container that is going to house our information about this featured drink, we can start actually bringing over some of the elements that we were using in this particular screen here. So I'm going to dive in here to this product info. I'm going to simply copy it, hop over here and paste. Now, of course, this is probably way too big for this smaller area, so I can shrink it down just a touch, just like that. And I might want to play around with the colors a little bit. Maybe for all these, we're just going to go for a nice solid white, just like that. And we may want, a little bit of an icon, possibly. So I'm going to go over here to my plugins panel. Pumpkin. There's no pumpkin icons? Well, that's sad. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Nucleo application, which is a third-party icon manager. I do have a bunch of paid icon sets in here. There's got to be a pumpkin. There we go. We have some pumpkins. Great. Bring that into Adobe XD. We'll change this color to white. Make it a little bit larger. and center it. There we go. Perfect. All right, so we've got our header, we've got a little bit of text, and now we might want a button, right? So we have a button down here. We can definitely use that. This one was not converted into a component just yet, but what we could do is convert this into a component, or you can just copy it and pop it there. I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller. And I'm thinking that the rounded corners, they're a little bit too round in this particular case. So I'm gonna just bring these back a touch. Let's go for, let's see what 8 looks like. 8 looks a little bit, I mean, it's not bad, but I might want a little bit more round. So 16 might work. All right, so that's looking all right. I'm gonna add a little bit more breathing room down here at the bottom, bring this down a touch. Perfect. All right, so just like we did earlier, I always like enabling stacks. Even though I'm probably not going to use it in this particular case, I do want to make sure to group many of these elements. So turn that on, group that. This is going to be info, and turn on the stack, just in case for whatever reason I decide I want the button up here. Now I just noticed the pumpkin disappear. Where did the pumpkin icon go? Oh, it wasn't in that group. Ha, now it is. Bam, perfect. All right, Vipin's saying, during prototype, if we add a rectangle as an overlay pop-up, do we automatically get a background blur effect? So you don't automatically get one, but if you have the background blur enabled on the rectangle, that's part of the artboard that you're using for the overlay, then that background blur should be respected when the overlay does take place. But it's not automatically going to be added unless you have the background blur turned on. But that should work if you just turn it on. All right, so that's looking okay. Again, you know, contrast is definitely a thing we're gonna have to pay attention to, but for now, we're gonna move on. We can imagine this as like a lower fidelity prototype. We'll run with that. Now, down here at the bottom, we may want some icons to navigate to different areas of this application. So, for example, we might want home, and there's a really fun looking icon right over here. I'm just going to drag a few of these icons directly into XD. We might want order, or maybe some, like, let's say a coffee cup, if I can spell coffee correctly. That one's not bad. What other coffee cups do we have? I think, you know, there's this one here, but we're going to go with this one. And then maybe like a present, so you can buy gifts or gift cards or things like that. That one's not bad. And then finally, we might want like a user icon for your profile. All right, so we've got, now this one came in as a non-bordered icon, so I'm gonna just dive in here, grab the bordered icon. That's better. Okay, so in terms of the size of these, I may wanna make sure that they're fairly consistent, right? So I'm gonna make sure that the height across these is, let's try about 36. Let's see what that looks like. That might be too large. I'm also going to change the color to white. But 36 might be too large. Let's see. Actually, it's not too bad. That's not bad. I think that could work. I'm going to put the user icon over here. And then with all of these selected, I'm going to use the alignment and distribution options at the top. So I'm going to center them or align them horizontally, and then just align or distribute them vertically. There we go. And one more time, like we've done a few times during this stream, Command and Control G, these will be called nav icons. I'm going to turn on a stack. That way, if I needed to, I can swap these positions very quickly. All right, so that's looking okay, right? Again, that we had that search bar at the top, wasn't loving it, so we are going to pretend it never happened. We may want some sort of an icon at the top as well. Let's go back to coffee. Is there maybe an icon of a bean? That one's kind of weird. I suppose this could work. I'm gonna drag this in. We're gonna use our lovely gold color, and this will be the icon. Now you have to remember, if you're designing for a modern day iPhone, in this case it's an iPhone XS, XS Max, right? There's the notch at the top. It's about 42 pixels, taking up space at the top. And there's also a home indicator down at the bottom, which is somewhere like right around here, right? Somewhere right about there. So keep that in mind. You don't want any information, specifically this logo at the top, you don't want it too far up there because half of it's going to get cut off anyway. So just give it a little bit of breathing room up at the top. Make sure everything is spaced out really nicely. And there we go. Which icon collection are those from? So which one did this come from? It was probably symbol icons. Yeah, so this was symbol icons, and I bought this a long time ago. Stoked? It's probably supposed to be stroked, but this icon set I believe was part of something internally. And then I have some feather icons. These are free. These are open source. Nucleo does have their own icon set. Hey, Valeria. Nucleo does have their own icon set. I have not purchased it yet, as you can see with the lock icon, because I do have icons already. But honestly, for the majority of things that I design on streams like this, the Icons for Design plugin, which gives you access to open source icons, has been great, except Pumpkin. I guess there's no Pumpkin icon, but Coffee, there's a bunch of coffee icons. And this one is, I think that's actually the one I've been using. So yeah, Icons for Design. What about the search bar? Yeah, I didn't like the search bar. I wasn't loving it, so I hid the search bar. And honestly, what we can probably do is just dive into the search bar here, grab the icon, and just paste it up here. I'll just use the same, right? And I can just put the search icon over here. That way it's there if users need it. It's a bit too big. And I'm gonna bump there we go. Look, now we have a search experience. Again, like I mentioned and like Philip mentioned, it's really not the entry point to this specific application. We probably don't want users to go directly to search. Maybe sometimes, possibly, right? But we want them to look at the featured drinks. We want them to go to the drinks section, which we're gonna get to in just a second. And maybe even, go down here to the navigation icons at the bottom. But probably we don't want them to focus too much on that search bar, which I wasn't liking the design of it anyway. So, all right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna tackle the drinks section. So in here, if I just drop this and bump this up and vroom, drag this over, we are going to tackle this. Now, in this particular section, we don't want these massive images that take up half the artboard, right? And I should probably mention, one of the things I wanted to get to is maybe have, another featured drink kind of like hanging off the side, so that users can swipe between, but maybe we'll get to, we probably won't have time actually. So over here, we want to use a repeat grid. And there's a few ways we can do this. I'm gonna start with a rectangle and draw out a rectangle just like this. I will round out the corners a little bit so we have a little bit of fun style. And then over to the right, we might want some information about this drink. Joshua says it's finally Friday. Indeed it is. I've been recording videos for Adobe Max all week and it's exciting, but I'm happy it's the weekend. All right, so I'm gonna, let's go for coffee name. That's very large. I'm gonna drop this down, make sure to left justify it. Let's try 18. And I'll position it about 16 pixels from the left and maybe underneath. Is that too small? No, it could work. Maybe we'll want the number of calories, for example. So this could just be calories. And maybe I'll drop the weight because this is secondary information. Maybe we'll drop the opacity as well, just a little bit. That looks pretty good right there. And then maybe over to the far right, we might want a way to very quickly favorite some of these icons, right? So what I'm gonna do is, of course we could go into the icon manager or icons for design, look up heart, grab an icon from there, or some of you may not know this, but there's a little bit of an Easter egg inside of Adobe XD. If you grab your polygon tool, draw out a polygon like that, and then in the properties inspector, where it says, right now it says 3, this is the number of sides. If you do a little heart, kind of like I don't know what you call this, but less than 3, and you press return, you have a heart. Fancy, right? And maybe for this one, this is non-favorited, so I'm just going to set it as a border icon and just pop this. It might be a little bit too large. Drop that down just a touch. And there we go. Make sure that, perfect. Okay, so now we have one of these entries, right? We have our picture that we're going to use. We have coffee name, calories, and we have our heart over to the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these objects. I can put them into a group, or what I can do is turn on repeat grid right here at the top. So I'm going to turn on repeat grid, boop, there we go. There's a little boop animation, of course. And there, Riza is saying, where is boop? There is boop. And now I can just drag out additional coffees going down this artboard. I can also adjust the spacing. Mind-blowing, I know, isn't that cool? We released that, I think it was last year, or was it this year? I don't remember. This year's been weird, so I don't have track of time anymore. I can't keep track of it. It was either last year or this year at Valentine's Day. We released that Easter egg. It was fun. So now that we have our repeat grid set up, there's a few ways to get content into a repeat grid, right? We can hop over here to Finder, and I've got, again, these great looking images of coffee, and I can grab a bunch of these images, drag them directly in here, pop that in. You can also drag in text files. So plain text documents, you can pop them in there to fill out the coffee names and calories, or you can dive in and manually fill these out. Or you can use one of my favorite plugins in XD, the Google Sheets plugin. Now, before I dive into the actual plugin, I want to make sure that all of my layers are, Joshua says, this year on Valentine's Day. It feels so long ago. February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. I mean, it was 8 months ago, but it feels like it was decades ago. So I want to make sure that this year is weird. I agree. I want to make sure that all my layers are named properly. And you want to make sure that they're named based on the spreadsheet you're working on. So if I go back to Safari, I've got a spreadsheet over here that you can imagine that maybe you are working on the spreadsheet, or somebody in your team who likes working with data, because I certainly don't. Maybe they're working on the spreadsheet and they're constantly keeping this up to date, right? So we have a few columns. We have a product column, calories, and image. And we want to make sure that the layer names inside of this repeat grid match this. Joshua says, hey, another Joshua. Look, you're basically best friends now, I think. I think that's the rule, right? So I'm going to go back over here, and this is going to be image. So I'm going to just name this image. And because we're working in a repeat grid, they're all going to change to image, which is great. This one here is going to be called product, and calories is going to be called calories. Bam. And that'll just make your life so much easier when you get around to actually importing this Google Sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL of this Google Sheet, hop over here, and we're going to dive into the plugins panel one more time. Now, I don't have this one installed at the moment. I purposely got rid of all my plugins so I can show you all how to browse and install plugins. Google, install the Google Sheets plugin. And when you're inside of this plugin, you can pull from a few different sources. You can go ahead, if you feel comfortable, in linking your entire Google account, well, not your entire Google account, just your Google Sheets, so that it automatically pulls in your documents. For security purposes, I choose not to do that, but I'm sure it's very safe and secure, but I don't want to. You can also paste the URL on an individual basis, or if you're working on a local file, you can upload a CSV directly into the plugin. So I'm going to go ahead and paste the URL and import. It's going to grab all that information. Anahit is asking, how do you bring up Finder on a Mac? So I'm just using the, well, you can't see it it's on my other monitor, but I'm using the quick, what is it? I don't even remember what it's called, but when you do Command Tab, just to cycle between the different applications, and I just land on Finder and pop it up. And of course I have my tabs at the top, photos. I've got my top secret Adobe Max folder. I don't know if I should go into that or not. Probably not. So I've gone ahead and imported my Google Sheet that I copied to my clipboard. And what you're going to notice down here at the bottom is it's automatically mapped out the column names to the layers that I manually named, which is why it's so important to make sure your names are up to date. Now, of course, if you did not manually name your layers, or you named it something completely different, you can go ahead and manually map things out. But because I'm lazy, I just want to make sure I do it from the beginning. And now all I have to do is press apply. And there we go. Now, of course, this image is kind of long, so drag this over. Now, Nina's asking, does the URL for Google Sheets need to be public? So in this particular case, when you paste a URL, then yes, it has to be public. Otherwise, this plugin cannot access it. However, if you do not want to make the URLs public or the sheets public, you can link your Google Sheets account directly to this plugin. And I believe in that situation, you can pull in private information, but you do have to authenticate with the plugin. Of course, if you have a local file, you can do that as well. So it just pulled it in, right? It's so secret that he showed it to us. Well, I didn't go into the folder, right? So there's stuff in there that you can't see. I love messing with all of you. So it's gone ahead and pulled in the images, it's pulled in the product names, it's also pulled in the calories. Now what you're noticing is that because in the Google Sheet, right, I only had basically numbers for the calories. So it doesn't actually say anything beside it. And this is kind of where the power of stacks and repeat grids really comes into play, right? So what I can do is I can put this calories layer into a group. Is there a plugin for choosing images? There is a plugin for choosing images. And I don't remember exactly what it's called, but if you look up stock, I believe my good friend Kenny created one of these. I forget which one it was. Stock image, but there are a few of them. And if you look up Kenny, oh no, what's his name? Kenny Krosky on Twitter. I believe he created a plugin not too long ago, but from, pulling in stock images and things like that. So what I've done now is I've put this into a group. Now inside of this group, what I might want is maybe a text layer that just says calories. Now, if I were to simply, right, not put this into a group and I align it with this one, what you're going to notice is that because this particular text layer, 150, is longer than this one here, it kind of gives us this weird spacing for these smaller ones. And if any of them had, let's say the number 1, right, you just have this massive space. So to solve that, I'm actually going to, on this group that's called calories, I'm going to turn on stacking. Now, of course, nothing really happened at the moment because there's only one layer in it, but I do have a horizontal stack enabled. So now if I dive into this group and I do the exact same thing, you're going to notice that now it's spaced out properly, right? We have 5 pixels from calories to 150. And even though 25 is smaller, we still have 5 pixels because a stack is enabled and it's automatically adjusting the spacing for us across all of these, which is wonderful, right? Now, one more thing I should probably mention is that, when I pulled in from the Google Sheet, there were 8 different coffees on here, but I only had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coffees on this particular repeat grid. However, it still pulls in that information. So if I drag this down to add 3 more of those coffees, that information still exists, which is great. So it pulled in everything. Now, of course, everything's kind of overlapping and looking kind of strange, right? At this point, what we might want to do is, instead of having the entire artboard scroll, maybe we just want this one contained area. So I've got this selected here. And over to the right, we have our scroll group options. We have our horizontal scroll group, vertical, and horizontal and vertical. But in this case, we only want to be able to scroll horizontal. Riza is saying the calorie numbers are not readable. You are absolutely right. I'm going to get to that in 1 second. So I'm going to turn on vertical scroll group and just bring this back up. And what that will allow me to do is launch the preview and scroll. And now I can access all of my different coffees that are part of that repeat grid. Now, going back to what Riza was talking about, is the calorie numbers are not readable. And you are right. So it's using the Mastra typeface right now. Joshua, we need pop-ins in that case. Yes, we do. So Mastra, not a great typeface for numbers, unless you want to get really fancy. But in this case, at this small of a font, probably don't want to do that. So I'm going to just select both of these text layers. Pop-ins. Bam. And again, because we are using a repeat grid, all the changes that I make to one of the cells populates and pushes to all of the other ones, which is perfect. There we go. So thank you, Riza. Thank you, Joshua. I can probably keep the Mastra typeface for the headers and the coffee names, but I think I agree. For the calories, we're going to run with it. Now, very quickly, one more thing I want to get to is components inside of a repeat grid. So by default, if I were to grab any of these hearts, right, and I were to change this to a fill, to red, it as you would expect on a repeat grid, it pushes it to all of them. However, if you want to make sure you can make overrides to an element within a repeat grid, turn it into a component. Make component, Command and Control K. That way I can go onto any of these other hearts, which are instances of that main component, change the color to red or whatever. Actually, we should probably change it to the gold. Ooh, fancy, right? And now you're noticing it did not apply it to any of the other ones. So that is going to wrap it up for today. Before we wrap things up, I know many of you wanted to look inside of this Mac's secret folder. I've been contemplating in my head whether I should do it. But because many of you have been so nice and so welcoming today, there you go. Enjoy. That's going to wrap it up for me for today. Big thank you to everyone who has joined me during today's masterclass. Next week we are off, so no masterclasses, but we will be back the week after. And then, of course, Max is just around the corner. So big thank you again, Felix and Cody and Joshua on a heat, and Megan and everyone else. Hope you all have a great weekend, and I'll see you all. Looks like some of you are seeing what's going on. I'll see you all later.